When I married David, I thought I had finally found the kind of life I used to envy in others. Quiet, steady, and anchored in certainty. He was older, calm in a way that felt reassuring. A man who seemed to know where he was going and what he wanted. For someone like me, who had lived too long in the chaos of broken relationships and false promises, his steadiness felt like safety. I was ready to build something lasting. But when you marry a man who already has a son, you inherit more than a husband. You inherit a history, a bond you weren't there to shape, a love that came before you and will always exist whether you fit into it or not. Ethan was part of that inheritance. He was in his early 20s, handsome in a way that drew attention without his effort, polite but reserved, with that guarded look children of divorce often carry into adulthood. He didn't make it easy for me, but he wasn't cruel either. He kept a respectful distance, as if waiting to see what kind of role I would play in his father's life before letting me into his. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. I didn't need to be his friend or confidant. I only needed to be consistent. Someone he could rely on if he wanted. Someone who wouldn't replace his mother, but wouldn't disappear either. We made small talk over dinners, shared polite smiles during holidays, posed for photographs that looked far warmer than what I actually felt inside. And for a time, that was enough. But marriages have a way of shifting under your feet when you least expect it. David, the man I had once looked at with such certainty, began to change. He worked longer hours, carried his stress home with him, and spoke less and less at the dinner table. At first, I brushed it off as a rough patch, something every couple endured. But soon the rough patch became the landscape itself. His silences grew heavier. His affection, once easy and natural, became occasional and distracted. I would find him asleep in the living room more often than in our bed. I began to feel like an afterthought in my own marriage, and that's when Ethan started staying with us more frequently. I told myself his presence might soften David, might restore some of the warmth we had lost. But instead, what I noticed unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Ethan saw me in ways his father no longer did. He noticed if I was tired, if I had changed my hair, if I'd left a meal untouched at dinner. They were small things, nothing anyone else would pay attention to. But they pierced me all the same. It was innocent then, or at least, that's what I insisted to myself. But even in those early moments, something unspoken lingered in the air, like the faint hum of a storm building far off in the distance. And deep down, I knew that storm was moving closer. The nights were the hardest. David would often fall asleep in his chair, papers scattered across his lap, the low hum of the television filling the silence between us. I would sit in the kitchen, pretending to busy myself with small tasks, wiping an already clean counter, rinsing cups that didn't need rinsing, simply because the quiet pressed too heavily on me when I sat alone. That's where Ethan found me most often. His footsteps were lighter than his father's, his presence less predictable, and yet I began to expect him all the same. He'd lean against the doorframe with that casual ease young men seem to carry, asking if I couldn't sleep, or if something was on my mind. At first I dismissed his concern with quick answers, but the more time passed, the more I realized he was the only one who noticed I had grown restless, that the life I had thought so secure was unraveling in the spaces no one else cared to look. Our conversations started harmlessly enough. College courses, his friends, stories about his mother. But inevitably, they drifted into deeper waters. He'd ask questions I wasn't prepared for. Did I ever feel misunderstood? Did I ever wonder what my life might have looked like if I had chosen differently? His words were careful, yet probing, and I couldn't help but feel they mirrored the very thoughts I kept locked away. And so, I answered. Against my better judgment, I let him see pieces of me I hadn't shown anyone in years. I confessed my loneliness, the way I felt invisible in my own home, the ache of watching someone you love drift further out of reach. He listened with an intensity that unsettled me. His eyes, so much like his father's but sharper somehow, held me in place, daring me to admit truths I had buried even from myself. I told myself it was only conversation, that there was no harm in being heard. But late at night, lying awake in bed beside a man who no longer reached for me, I replayed those talks with Ethan in my head. The sound of his voice, the way he leaned forward when I spoke, as though my words were worth holding on to. It was intoxicating in a way I didn't want to name. One evening, when David was away on a business trip, Ethan lingered after dinner. We cleared the table together, our hands brushing as we reached for the same plate. The contact was accidental, fleeting, but the silence that followed was not. It was charged, heavy, filled with everything we weren't saying aloud. I felt it in my chest, in the quickening of my breath, in the sudden awareness that the line between us had already begun to blur. I pulled away first, forcing a smile, insisting I was tired and retreating upstairs. But even as I closed the door to my room, I couldn't quiet the storm that had been building inside me. And for the first time, I realized it wasn't just about what Ethan noticed. It was about what I could no longer ignore. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm I both dreaded and craved. David remained caught in his world of deadlines and distractions, and I remained the quiet, dutiful partner who smiled when expected and kept the household steady. But beneath that calm surface, something else was taking shape, something I could no longer dismiss as harmless coincidence. Ethan's presence lingered in every corner of the house. He wasn't intrusive, but he was there, in the way his laughter filled the spaces David's silence left empty, in the way his eyes followed me with a curiosity I pretended not to notice. The air between us felt different, as though charged by a current we both sensed but refused to name. One evening, as I folded laundry in the living room, Ethan dropped onto the couch beside me. He reached for a shirt, neatly folded already, and unfolded it with a mischievous grin. "You're too perfect," he teased. "Doesn't it ever get exhausting?" I laughed, though my voice caught. "It's called order, Ethan. Some of us need it. Or maybe," he said, his tone shifting into something softer. "It's just another way to hide how lonely you are." The words struck deeper than I wanted to admit. I stared at him, trying to muster a sharp reply, but his gaze was steady, unflinching, and it left me feeling exposed. I turned back to the laundry, my hands fumbling, my breath uneven. It was dangerous, the way he saw through me. From that moment, every interaction carried a new weight. A passing comment, a lingering glance, an accidental brush of hands. None of it lasted more than seconds. Yet the memory of each moment replayed in my mind for hours. I began to live in two worlds: the outward life of a wife keeping her marriage intact, and the inner life of a woman standing too close to a line she knew she shouldn't cross. The conflict consumed me. At night, lying beside David, I would close my eyes and feel the guilt pressing like a stone against my chest. I hadn't done anything. Not really. But the intent was there, thrumming beneath the surface. And intent, I knew, could destroy a marriage just as surely as action. One night, unable to sleep, I padded downstairs for water. The kitchen was dark except for the soft glow of the refrigerator. Ethan was there, sitting at the table, scrolling absent-mindedly through his phone. He looked up as I entered, his face half in shadow, half in light. "You're awake too," he murmured. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the silence between us carried every unspoken word, every unsaid desire, every fear neither of us dared to voice. It was unbearable, electric, and terrifying all at once. I broke it with a whisper. "Good night, Ethan." I left the room before he could answer, but the silence followed me upstairs. And I knew with chilling certainty this was no longer something I could outrun. It happened on a night that should have felt ordinary. David had returned from a late meeting, his jacket still damp from the evening drizzle, and the house smelled faintly of rain and wood polish. I had been in the living room, pretending to read a book, but my mind was elsewhere, haunted, restless, anticipating a storm I hadn't named yet. Ethan was already there, seated by the window with his phone in hand. He didn't look up immediately, but I felt his gaze on me. A tension, taut and unspoken, threaded through the room. I tried to anchor myself in the ordinary. The muted tick of the clock, the distant rumble of traffic, the soft patter of rain against the glass. But nothing could shield me from what I knew was coming. David's footsteps approached, slower than usual, deliberate. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, but carrying an undercurrent I couldn't place. I froze, realizing that in that moment, the web of half-truths, silences, and unspoken glances was about to unravel. Ethan glanced at me, then at his father. Something shifted in his expression. Hesitation, a spark of fear, and then a weighty resolve. He spoke quietly, but the words struck like stones thrown into still water. "Dad, we need to talk." I felt my stomach drop. The calm I had maintained for weeks, the careful separation of thoughts and actions, shattered in an instant. My pulse raced, and the book I had clutched slipped from my hands. The silence stretched, unbearable and electric, before David leaned back in his chair, his face tightening with a slow, dawning comprehension. "What is it?" he asked, the casual tone gone. Ethan's voice trembled, barely audible. "It's about Mom, about us." The words landed like a punch I had known was coming but had hoped to avoid. Everything I had tried to keep contained. The stolen glances, the moments of dangerous intimacy, the tension I could never admit, collapsed into undeniable truth. I was caught, not by action, not by confession, but by the weight of exposure that only comes when someone you trust finally names the unnameable. David's eyes flicked between us, disbelief written in every line of his face, my own heart hammered in my chest, shame and fear entangling with something I dared not acknowledge. The twisted relief that the secret no longer belonged only to me. Ethan looked away, his jaw tight, shoulders hunched, carrying the burden of words he hadn't wanted to speak aloud. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as though the walls themselves understood the gravity of what had been revealed. I wanted to flee, to disappear into the night, to unmake every choice that had led us here, but I couldn't. The revelation had stripped me bare, leaving nothing between us but truth, raw and jagged. In that moment, I understood the full weight of my own complicity. Not just the moments that had passed, but the quiet accumulating decisions that had allowed the line to blur. And as the rain continued to tap against the window, I realized that nothing would ever feel the same again. The days that followed were quiet, but the quiet carried a weight far heavier than any argument could. Words had been said, truths exposed, and the fragile walls we had built around ourselves now lay in rubble. David retreated inward, not in anger, but in stunned disbelief. Ethan and I spoke little, each glance heavy with what had been shared, and what we both knew could never be undone. I spent hours wandering the house, tracing the familiar spaces as though mapping the fractures within them. Every room held memories I couldn't reclaim. Dinners where laughter had masked tension, mornings when the sun spilled through the blinds, and nothing in my life had felt safe. Nights when silence had become my constant companion. The weight of my own choices pressed on me relentlessly. I wanted to rewrite the past, to step into a different version of myself who had drawn a line and kept it, who had not allowed desire to blur boundaries. David didn't speak of leaving, nor did he offer comfort. We existed side by side in a delicate truce, our shared home a silent testament to what had happened and what might still survive. There were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible, when he looked at me and I thought I saw forgiveness flicker in his eyes. But I could not mistake it for reconciliation, not yet, not without time to untangle the threads of hurt, betrayal, and unspoken longing. Ethan became a shadow in the house, neither close nor distant, his presence a reminder of everything I had jeopardized. I realized that my actions had not only fractured my marriage, but had altered the dynamics of our entire family. The weight of that realization was relentless. It followed me into sleep, crept into the edges of my work, and lingered in the quiet corners of my mind where I could not escape it. And yet, in the midst of the guilt and shame, I also recognized the truth that had always been there. I had been searching for something, attention, validation, a spark of life that I had neglected to seek within myself. It was not justification, but understanding. It was a reminder that even the smallest compromises of self-awareness can ripple into consequences far greater than anticipated. I began to write again, chronicling everything, not to confess, but to remember. To face the echoes of my choices honestly, without flinching. Each word was a small act of reclamation, a way to acknowledge the past without allowing it to consume me entirely. The house remained the same, yet nothing within it felt unchanged. We moved forward in the quiet, step by tentative step, each day a negotiation of space, trust, and the fragile hope that life could hold more than pain. And as I sat by the window one evening, the sun casting long shadows across the floor, I realized that some moments follow you endlessly, not as punishment, but as reminders of the fragility of trust, the complexity of love, and the resilience of the human heart. Some secrets never leave you. Some truths never fade, but living in the aftermath is the only way to honor the lessons they bring.